Let me start to switch to English. Okay, so let's wait 1 more minute. So I see people joining into the classroom. Well, to whatever this thing is called. And we can start talking about the new topic that we have. Oh, come on. And okay, I don't see more people are joining. So let's start with this class. So we have been talking about mortality, and mortality makes sense from the actuarial perspective. But now we have to talk about fertility, and then in 2 weeks we will talk about migration. So these topics, fertility and migration, probably don't make that much sense in terms of actuarial perspective, but they're important if for population projections, and that is again something that actuaries are really into. So we need to discuss these topics, and again, if you ever go into demography, of course, you will have to study fertility, migration, and some other processes that are important for the study of populations. But this topic is actually I really like it a lot. I haven't had the time to explore it to get into fertility, but it's a really nice topic, and where I believe there's a lot of things to study. Probably not the things that we're going to see in this today and the following week, but more in terms of trying to understand or to explain the behaviors that we see in terms of reproduction, fertility, and some other factors that are included that should be included in these things. So as I was telling you, we have been discussing mortality, and mortality, remember, that is, it refers to this process where we see how the impact of how population, essentially how the population is disappearing because of the impact of mortality. So it's this process of decrements in our population. Now, fertility is actually the opposite. Fertility is studying how this population is increasing by the process that the members of the population are creating new members. So in the demographic perspective, fertility refers more to a process in terms of the population as a collectivity than more than for one person. So the same way we were studying mortality, seeing how people were dying, now we are going to see how this population are creating new babies, essentially, right? And then we will link this concept of fertility to the concept or to the term of reproduction. And reproduction essentially means how this population is making sure, or if they are getting there, to reproduce itself. So essentially replace those who are dying with new members of the population. So we will see first how these population members of the population are creating new members, and also we'll see if these new members are enough to account for those that are living in my population, okay, because they're dying or some other reasons. And in this process, we will include mortality and fertility as well. So something important before I continue is that I think this is something that I mentioned before, but if we study fertility in English, and if we translate this concept to Spanish, it's actually fecundidad. And if we take the concept of fecundity in English, in Spanish is fertilidad. And why? I don't know. But essentially, all Romance languages we use fecundidad to study fertility. So that's in French is fecundité, and in Portuguese fecundidade, or whatever they pronounce it. So all Romance languages, all those that are coming from Latin, essentially we use fecundidad to refer to this social process or to this collective process. Where in English and in German they use more fertility. Uh, I was telling the other section, I have this friend from Puerto Rico who, of course, they have Spanglish in their everyday language. So he always referred to fertilidad, and I was like, okay, Alexis, you're good. We are in the States. I don't care. But if you ever go to Mexico, you have to change that for fecundidad, because the demographers are going to eat you alive down there. And we are going to discuss the term or the concept of fecundity here, because that is also important. But in Spanish, that means fertilidad, which is more the biological perspective of these things. Okay, so this is just something that we have to keep in mind. Again, if you make this mistake, I will not get that upset or really upset, but I will correct you on the spot. Okay, so fertility is kind of more complex than mortality, because we have these following things going on. First, it's not a universal risk, meaning that we know everybody is going to die. So mortality is a universal. The intensity of mortality is 100, or that those are concepts that we haven't explored that much. But everybody dies. That means that the intensity will be 100. When we talk about fertility, we know that not everybody will have or will produce a live birth. So essentially, the intensity of that is less than 100. So we always have few members of the population not creating new babies, and this nowadays can be because of choice, or because of health-related issues, or before we had all these important segment of the population going into religious activities. So we know those members, even voluntary or involuntarily, they will not have babies. So again, it's not a universal risk, and that is something that we need to take into account. So if we were to estimate a life table, let's say, we could, I don't know if you started with the evaluation, but in the evaluation, I am asking you to create a life table for breastfeeding. Here, we could create a life table for those survivors without having babies. So, and we will start with one cohort of whatever size, and then we will start eliminating those who are having babies. And the thing is, in mortality, we know that at the end, the last value, we have the probability of leaving the population because of your dying is 1. Here, if we create a life table, the probability of leaving my population because you're having a baby is not 1 at the end. So we need to fix to take that into account, and that is something that we will discuss when we see survival models at the end of the semester. So again, is something important. Now, it involves 2 individuals, and again, this is usually not all the time, because now we have reproductive or assisted reproduction, and we have some other aspects, but also in take like moving that medical technology to the side, we could have polygamous couples. We have some other aspects that, yes, at the end of the day, it's only 2 individuals, but socially we could have some weird combinations going on. So and we know that that component is really significant. So we have something that we should pay attention to. And the last thing that is really important is that the information that we have is that is usually available only for the mother and not for the father. And this has to do with probably just it's a tradition that we should revisit probably, and see if we could change the way we ask these questions. But even if we use some other approaches that we usually have using census information and all these things, there have been some trials where we ask the same question to women and men are not really good at reporting the number of kids they had, probably because they don't want to. That is one. Also because they forget about some kid. That is possible, but and it even can be that they don't know, and that is something that also could happen. Whereas if we ask women, I'm pretty sure they will remember how many kids they have had. And again, they are better at reporting these things. So That is a thing that we should pay attention. Again, I ask you to download the information for the number of pairs by age of the mother, and I don't even know if INEGI has the option to select age of the father, but I'm pretty sure if you had that option, you will end up with lots of missing values. And now, well, of course, there are some countries that have better information, mostly European countries, where now they are studying fertility for men. And I remember during my PhD, I ended up doing one paper for fertility for Mexican men in the US, because they had this amazing survey where you can actually follow and track these behaviors, but in Mexico we don't have that information, or at least not yet. So those are some components that we need to keep in mind. And again, the concept of fecundity refers to the biological component of fertility. What I was telling you, fecundity would be fertilidad in Spanish, and I think fertilidad, we understand having all these, the likelihood of getting pregnant and or getting somebody else pregnant and then being able to reproduce. And we know that what happens is the same as happens with mortality. Fecundity, and this is the biological component of fertility, changes with age. It is not the same. You are not as likely to get pregnant when you're a teenager, when you are in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. So we know these changes with age. But again, mortality was you are born, you die. But fertility starts later in life. It starts for women. It's really clear when it can start. For men, it's more. Yes, there's also one beginning, but for women, it's more marked with the first menstruation and all the way to menopause. Those are the years that we usually refer to as reproductive span. And for men, reproductive span is actually longer, and it's really hard to track, because again, it is not as clear as having one of them the first menstruation. Okay, so we have all these things, but so all this that's the reason essentially that we pay attention more to women, but we will include some components to measure the effect of having men or a boy or a girl when the pregnancy completes. Hmm. And something that is, again, is such an interesting topic, and this is one of the reasons I am really sad that I haven't been able to explore more these topics of fertility, is because it's really interesting how if we measure mortality. Yes, we know that mortality depends on, yes, your age, but also your behaviors. If you drink, if you smoke, if you party really hard, or if you have some risky behaviors, that is going to affect. And fertility is also affected by a social component and behaviors that we have. But mostly, the most significant thing is that fertility is affected by sexual activity, because, again, it is a significant component, again, ignoring the reproductive technology that we have nowadays. But sexual activity is really and is strongly controlled by societies. It's a socially regulated and limited activity. So again, we can think about having societies changing in these things. We have societies being more open to premarital intercourse and all these things. But at the end of the day, fertility continues to be something that is mostly conducted inside a household or a family formation context. So again, we have countries where this is not true anymore, countries that are more liberal, but also we have countries that are more conservative in this aspect. And even in Mexico, we have different perspectives, and not only in Mexico, but also in same. Let's say think about Mexico City. We have certain sectors in Mexico City that are more open to accept new behaviors, and some others that are not, or are certain restrictions or reactions to these new perspectives. So that is important, because these social aspects control not only sexual activity but also access to contraception, age at marriage, and second unions, divorces, and all these things. Which again, this is something that we'll see. We're going to explore a little bit when we have one session to talk about nuptiality and this union formation. But it's really interesting to try to understand what is going on with fertility and the role of society and social norms in these aspects. And again, some other aspects that I'm not going to explore. is the role of sexual partners and the negotiation and that goes in sexual activities. We know that because of surveys, we have surveys in Mexico that are really good at measuring this. The choice or the decision of using contraception is not only for the women. It should and it could, but again, we have men uh, being into the like weighting into the equation, and sometimes the decision is not for women. And sometimes even in a married couple, women are not the ones choosing when they have sexual activity, if they're using contraception, and even the number of kids they're going to have. So we have all these aspects. So we could measure these, and because we have surveys and there are some people studying these things, but also we could measure the effect of contraception and the impact of abortion, which is something, again, that is always a topic of discussion. I will not get into the debate of abortion, but it is something that we could explore. And actually, demographers are doing work on these things and trying to measure the effect or the impact of induced abortion, infertility, and so many things. We have information. Sadly, the official information only comes from Mexico City because that's where was is legal. But we have some ways, and that is where actuaries and demographers actually have more activities to do, is where we don't have like legal abortion. We know it still happens, and we have ways to actually estimate the prevalence of abortion in a specific country. So that is something that we usually do. And again, as I was telling you, this is a huge topic. We won't have time to explore these things, again, because for you in the actuarial sciences program, what the things that you need to do or to learn are the things that we are going to explore. But again, if you ever go into one population studies or demography program, you will go and study these things. I can tell you in my master, I had one complete semester to discuss fertility, and it was a really interesting class to take. But okay, so we have to stick to what we need. If you want me, if you want, I can send you some papers, some information which are really informative, and you can read about these things. So we need to discuss rates, okay? And this first rate is a rate that I have been mentioning from the not from the beginning of the semester, but when we discuss demographic transition, okay? And the crude birth rate essentially is the equivalent of the to the crude death rate, but this is measuring the number of births we have in one population in one period or in one specific year, divided by the number of person years that we have in the population in the same year. And remember that we approach the person years using the mid-year population. And we use the person years because person years essentially are giving us the total population that is exposed to the risk of having a live birth in this scenario. So this is the most common rate, but there are some aspects here that we need to discuss. And this has to do with language, probably, because for me it was actually one issue when I started studying in the US. But can men have a birth? That's the first question that I would have for you. Hmm? Men can father kids, but can they experience the risk of having a live birth? Exactly, no. Men are not exposed to this risk. And remember that when we have a rate, we have the number of events and we have the person years, but essentially we need the population that is exposed to risk of experiencing this event. So for the beginning, we have additional population there that we don't need. Let's say that I want to estimate the graduation rate for actuarial sciences at UTLAB, and I include in the denominator students, yes, from the actuarial sciences program, but also physics, data science, nanotechnology. So again, I have more population than I need because I am including individuals that are not in my population of interest. So we have a problem here. So we need to get rid of men. And is that all the population that we should get rid of? Mhm. Can you think of somebody else who is not at risk of having a live birth or experiencing a live birth? So we remove all men because they cannot get pregnant. And what happens about like with women age 5 or women age 75? Hmm? So there's another part of the female population that we know they are not at risk of getting pregnant. Okay, really young women will eventually get into this population, but once menopause has occurred, that's it. So okay, there are some issues. They can take hormones and get pregnant, but most it's not gonna that they're gonna produce the egg, but essentially they can serve as host for how do you call these subrogate mothers? I think I always forget that term. But again, it's not their baby by definition. So we need to get rid of men, women really young, women, I don't want to say really old, but after the reproductive span. And and of course, we still know that we will have some women in this population that are not at risk of getting pregnant, such as women who get their matrix removed, their uterus removed. Sorry, I'm thinking about matrix in the mathematics. The uterus removed. We have women who are not able to getting pregnant, and we have all these things that again is really hard to identify individuals from the population. But at least we know that the growth birth rate is not the most useful rate to study fertility because it's not a real rate, because we have more elements in the population at risk that elements that we need. So what we do is usually we try to limit this population at risk using not the total population, but we're going to use females ages 15 to 49. And again, we know, yes, there are some pregnancies and fertility before age 15, but there's also some experiences after age 50. So, but we know that most of these events happen between these two ages. And what happens in the tails is something, in one tail is not as problematic, probably more from the medical part of trying to understand what's happening with pregnancies at really advanced ages. But in the lower tail of the distribution, we know that this is a public policy issue, and there are some people studying what's happening with pregnancies before age 15. But again, those exist, but not that common. So what we do is we define the general fertility rate by just taking, again, the number of births in 1 year, 1 period by the median population for women between ages 15 to 49, and then we use the factor of 1,000, okay? So let's start with these numbers, and I ask you to download your population, and this is the population that you downloaded from INEGI, and this is just what we did for live tables. Again, I am not going to delete it because I have some cells to these values, but this is the information that you got from INEGI. And with this population and the population from your live tables, we can actually get these first rates. So to estimate the median population, I'm just gonna go to my live table, the total in 2000, and I'm going to add all these. And then 2005, I'm gonna do the same. And 2010. Same is, and 2015. There. So this is for my growth birth rate. But I also need for the general fertility rate, the population of women ages 15 to 49. I also have that from my live tables. Right, so I'm just gonna go here, live tables, men, women, 15 to 45 to 49. And 5, same. 2010, again. And 2015 is okay. So now I can estimate the growth bit rate by just taking the total number of birds that I got from INEGI by my median population, 1,000, and the general fertility rate, taking the same value here, but now divided by the female population ages 15 to 49, and then 1,000. Okay, and I can do that for all these years. Again, this is something that you have to do. It's really easy, straightforward, so I will not spend too much time here. So I just took those values and I got these charts. So we know this was happening. We know that Mexico is going through the demographic transition, and we are still experiencing this declining fertility. And we see this is happening with the growth bit rate. Again, just taking the total number of births by the population, and we are having 2015, 18.5 births per 1,000 individuals in our population. That would be the explanation that I would do to this. And the general fertility rate has the same trend, but of course we have higher values because we are included women between ages 15 to 49. And again, here for the Mexican population, this is not making a big difference in general trends. But do you remember the population pyramid for, I think it was the United Arab Emirates or Qatar? I don't remember which one of those countries we explored here when we were talking about population pyramids. Now, imagine you estimate your growth bit rate using the total population. And remember that they have this huge bump for men in the population because those men were essentially migrants. If I take all this population and then I get the growth bit rate, the value is going to be relatively, well, whatever value we have. But then if we only take women ages 15 to 49, and then we get the same value, it's going to increase a lot because we are removing this part of the equation that was associated with migration, which again is something that we need to be careful. And if we are going to compare countries, again, most countries will have similar structures in terms of these things, but we should be aware of what are we comparing. And if we are using the growth bit rate, keeping in mind that we have those effects of excess of male migration in some countries. Again. But again, this is the same interpretation. In 2015, Mexico had a general fertility rate of 67.2 births per 1,000 women in reproductive years. That's this thing. Again, these are really straightforward indicators. We can get them. Politicians love these indicators because they understand what's going on. So we are good to go. And again, even if these are essentially, we're just it's a division what we're doing, but in order to get the median population, remember all you have to do to get to your median population, you have to download the population, estimate growth rates, move that population to mid-year, smooth that population, evaluate and correct, and all those things that we have to do in order to get to a real good estimate of our person years by using the mid-year population. So it sounds like something easy, but behind all those things are things that we have been doing this semester. Okay. So again, I am not going to stop here. These are really interesting things, but let's move to this other indicator. And actually I have it as other indicator. And why is this? In Mexico, we have information. We have really good information. And for your state, you will get what you need, essentially from INEGI. But what if we have no information regarding the number of births, or we have no really good information for some reason? And before having a good vital registration system in Mexico, For so many countries, even nowadays, they have no idea of how many babies are being born. So what they do, or what we do when we have those situations, is we estimate what we call the child-woman ratio. And this is actually taking the number of kids ages 0 to 4 and dividing this value by the female population ages 15 to 49. And this is just an approximate of how significant is fertility in this region. And we can translate this nowadays and, for instance, try to understand differences in fertility in areas from one city or for small towns by doing this. So this indicator is mostly used for a geographical display of information when we don't have information on specific births for these regions, but we have information from the census. So it's sometimes really useful to do it. So just for the sake of it, let's estimate this value. And it should follow a trend similar to the one that we got for the crude birth rate and the general fertility rate. So just these two. And um, and we can get this ratio as this number of kids divided by women, and then 1,000. Again, it has a similar trend going down in general, which is, again, what we know is happening, and actually have it here in this plot. Again, this would be, we have for Mexico in 2015, we had 320 kids or children ages 0 to 4 per 1,000 women ages 15 to 49, which again is a big number because we're still relatively a young country. And again, but this is essentially when we have no other information. And actually, I usually forget about this indicator, and when I am checking notes for this class, I was like, oh yes, this actually exists. And I was thinking, okay, probably I should include this in one paper and try to do some special modeling, but we'll see if I have time. I don't know, one of these days. Okay, so these are basic indicators. These are essentially just exploring fertility and the number of births or births or babies or children in the population. So these are really general, and we are good with these things, but we know we can do better, right? So let's get into more interesting things. We had, when we discussed mortality, we had age-specific death rate. Well, now we have age-specific fertility rate. And before I forget, in English, if you go to books, they usually refer to this rate as the ASFR, just like that. But most international standards actually use this notation. These are the age-specific fertility rates, and this is just the notation that I am more used to, or that I use the most. So what happening, again, we know that the likelihood of having a baby changes with age. That is something that is given. And now, what if we want to study what is happening on these different ages or age groups? We're going to do it for this class in age groups, but we could do it for individual ages. That's fine. Again, for your states, I wouldn't go to individual ages. For Mexico, we could, but we will have some issues with, again, information, and we will have to smooth these things, and too many complications. So, but we could be interested on understanding what is happening with teenage pregnancy or with fertility at really older ages. So we can estimate this fertility rate by age of the mother. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the number of births, again, that are being observed for women ages X and X plus N. Again, women ages 15 to 19, 20 to 24, and so on, and dividing by the female population in that same age group. So essentially, you want to get rates for each specific age group. And here, the 1,000 factor, we could use it. Again, we could use it for displaying reasons, but then we're going to use these rates to estimate another rate, and the 1,000 factor is just adding some noise on these things. So I usually don't use it, but again, it's up to you. I want to communicate this, but again, it's for us. It's for actuaries. We're demographers. We understand rates before without having to use the 1,000 factor, right? It's like talking about probabilities. We talk about probabilities between 0 and 1 because we know that is the real value or the values that probability can take. But I think I told you I am teaching stats for master's program, and students are from business, from psychology, from all these programs, and they always use probabilities in terms of percentages. And even though I have been insisting and asking them not to do it, they still do it. So I just gave up. So, but again, we are actuaries. We don't need the 1,000 there, but if you want to, you can include it. So let's estimate these age-specific fertility rates and see what happens or how these rates actually look. Remember that we know that for mortality, the rates and probabilities look like a J, right? We have declining mortality and then increases until the last stages in life. So let's see what happens with these fertility rates. So I got this mid-year population from life tables, essentially. So this is a population that you already have. Sorry. And we have the number of births that we have that we got from INEGI. So essentially, you are just going to get this number of births and then the population, and just like that. Let me delete this. I was spoiling. Okay. So again, this is 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015. So let's see. And actually, I think, yes, we have it here. So 2000 is the blue one. Then the orange one is 2005, 2010 is gray, and 2015 is yellow. So you can see there's also, and this is the general pattern that we would expect in societies that are still going through the demographic transition. We have, we do know we have an issue here. We would expect this to be lower, but again, we know there's an issue with teenage pregnancy in Mexico and in most Latin American countries. But we have relatively low rates here, then the rates go up. Most or the highest values that we have for rates are between ages 20 to 24. Then they start going down a little bit for ages 25 to 29, and then they go down. And we have fewer women having babies at between ages 45 and 49. So this is helpful because here we can see patterns, as I was telling you, by age. And we can try to associate these to transitions in life, like graduating from school, entering the job market, or having a divorce, or all these things. We can try to associate these things to those. And something important is, as you can see, the gray and the orange, we see a general decline, but for the very first age group, 15 to 19, from the blue to the orange, yes, there was a decline, and then an increase, a small increase, and then it went down again. So what happens here is that was when CONAPO, again, CONAPO is the institution that is in charge of population policy in the country. So they found out this. They were like, okay, we have an issue with teenage pregnancy because it should be going down, or we have two options. Well, first, we had an increase, but let's say that the increase was small. It is not moving down. So we have to do something to try to push that even further down, because that is ideally what we would expect. Because again, having a baby at this age has implications for later in life. Okay, so and then they started with all these programs on TV and ads on radio and all these things. So I'm pretty sure you catch a couple of those things. But I remember that was when I was back, or I was in my master's. I don't remember. But that was when I remember being on the subway and finding all these ads on the subway, trying to promote the use of contraception and a lot of things. So these rates actually help us to understand how this is behaving in Mexico or in any country. And we can see also that we have a model age or a model age group in this scenario between 20 to 24. That's where most women will have babies. Okay, so let me move here. So again, this is the traditional shape, and this is again, these are just the charts that I have in here. So this is the model age. And I think we are going to estimate the mean age at motherhood next session, but again, it's something really easy. And we can see that it hasn't changed for Mexico in the longest time. So we are reducing fertility, but we are not reducing or moving this age. Ideally, we will like to see this age move to at least the following age group. But again, we have to understand what's going on in terms of policy and so many things in Mexico. Okay. So again, this is the shape, but let's see a few countries. And most of these charts or these lines represent a country in 2006, with the exception of the dark blue. Well, not the darkest blue, this blue here, because this is Mexico in 1970. So in 1970, what we can see is that the model age was not 20 to 24, it was 25 to 29. But the value was way too high, and it was high for many years, right? And then we see Mexico in 2006, and it's the orange one. And it's essentially what the chart that I just had, but of course, because of the scale, is changing a little bit. Okay, so now we have some other countries. So we have Ethiopia in 2006 is the light blue. And yes, they still have a high fertility, as you can see. Again, they have high values here, high values here. So that means that we have, okay, let's talk about this. The interpretation of this, and here I'm using the 1000 factor, is that women in Mexico in 1970, we had, well, no women, we had women, in Mexico, we had that women were having 300 babies or births per thousand women in age 25 to 29. So essentially, one out of every three women was having a baby in that age group in the 70s. So that's a lot, right? And now, but we can still see this country that they have really high rates. And then we can see some other countries that are actually, or in the scenario of Mexico, we are more in modern patterns of fertility. So we see Japan. So Japan is here in gray. So you can see Japan has a really low fertility, way lower than Mexico for the first, even for all this age, for the ages that we have. And what Japan has is that their modal age of fertility is actually 30 to 34. So that is the highest value that they have. And we will see what is the value, what's the implication of this for countries. Then we have France. France actually has a really high fertility compared to other countries in Europe. And that has to do with the policy that France has on having French kids, and they want to have a population around about a specific volume. So they are having all these programs to increase fertility. But as you can see in yellow, yes, French women are having fewer babies, and then they have here between ages 35 to 29, and then still high at the following age group, and then they go down because probably they are done with their desired fertility. They want to have more kids. We have Romania. Romania has high, relatively high in Europe, teenage fertility, but again, compared to Mexico, it's not that high. And then they have like relatively small fertility, even lower than Japan's apparently in some like in general, but they have low fertility. China is more like a square behavior, and I want to highlight Sweden, that is kind of behaving the same way as France, but as you can see, Swedish women are moving their fertility to later in life. So that's the reason they have a modal age between 30 to 35, and then they have a declining fertility that comes with age. Okay, so we can compare countries, we can compare Mexico or the same country in different years, and we can make all these comparisons for regions and so many things. So this helps identifying, again, changes if women are having like lots of babies throughout all their lives, or they are pushing their fertility to later life or to later ages, or they're having babies in Mexico. What happens in Mexico is the declining fertility is essentially after the first kid. This is something that we have seen. Most women are controlling fertility after having one baby, which is not probably ideal, uh, because what we see here in France and Sweden, they are controlling fertility throughout their lives. Then they decide to have babies, they have babies, and then they stop having babies. But having this really high early fertility means that there is some certain control of fertility, but is after having one child. And we have surveys that actually help identifying these things. So again, uh, interesting topic, but we don't have time to explore these things. However, we get to estimate a really interesting rate. Hmm? So we, using these age-specific fertility rates, we can estimate the total fertility rate, or tasa global de fecundidad, which is measuring the impact of fertility in this synthetic cohort. And this is similar to the life expectancy. Remember, the life expectancy, the interpretation was, okay, this is the average number of years I am expecting a child born in this year will live if mortality conditions stay the same. Hopefully, that's the idea of life expectancy that you get from life tables. But now with fertility, with total fertility rate, essentially what we have is the expected number of children a woman will have at the end of her reproductive years if fertility remains constant, which again is similar to life expectancy, but there we were measuring number of years. Here we're measuring average number of children a woman is expected to have, which is a really important indicator because we are going to see the impact of having all these age-specific rates being high early or later in life, and we can actually track the impact of these rates. So how are we going to do it? It's really easy. Since we didn't use the 1000 factor, we don't need to divide by 1000, but if we had, we just need to fix for that. But we're just gonna take the age-specific fertility rate for each age group, multiply that for the factor of 5, but I am moving the 5 out of the sum, or summation, whatever, um, because this is, remember that when we have births and population, we are getting the average at every year, or the average for all these age group. And since we have 5-year intervals, I need the 5 to control for that. If we have individual specific age-specific fertility rates, I would just add these rates. But again, this is not something that we have. So we have this scenario. So essentially, we're going to add them and multiply this value by 5. So let's get it here done. And this is what I had here. So it's going to be 5 times the sum of these rates. So 2.8, 2.5, 2.4, and 2.2. Well, let me change height. Okay. Let's leave it with 2 decimals. Okay. So this is only in the last 20, well, 15 years in this scenario, but 20 years ago. In the year 2000, a woman was expected to have, again, if fertility was constant or around the same levels, 2.9 children by the end of her reproductive life. Which, again, is that high? Is that low? That depends on what is the ideal family size in Mexico? What are our policies and the things that we're having? Then it went down, and now we are 2.18. And I think last year was about 2.1 or 2.09 or something like that. So we are moving around the 2.1 value. Okay. So this is again the same information, but just in a chart. Again, we can see this trend in the total and the average number of kids. So now let's see what happens in Mexico. So here I have Mexico for a few years. I got information from 1970, 1985, and 1995, and yes, from the UN Population Division, and that is a file that I uploaded with the slides. And 2015 and 5, I don't remember the 2005 I got it from my information or from the UN, but 2015 for sure I got it from the information that I have. And we can see, first, if we go to 1970, we see that let's start with that. The modal age was 25 to 29, but that didn't mean that women were controlling the fertility before. So they were just having babies, and they were continuing having babies at this age. And then we had this decline in fertility. And then we see changes here in general. But see how this blue line 1970 was resulting in on women having, on average, by the end of reproductive life, 6.6 children. And then in 1985, this went down to 2.6, and then to 3.26, and 2.7, and 2.18. Again, this is the effect of reducing fertility because of so many reasons, and especially Mexico has been all these program. In the 70s, when they saw these values, they were like, okay, this is too high. We need to do something. And they created CONAPO. CONAPO started having all these ads on TV. You are too young to remember, but I actually remember the last ads that they were airing back then on TV, and the slogan was "La familia pequeña vive mejor," and they were like being really, really pushy with that message. And apparently, population got it, and they reduced fertility. And again, there was a big campaign on access to contraception, and yes, some human rights violations in terms of asking women if they wanted to have their fallopian tubes cut. I always forget the name of that, salpingoclasia. That's in Spanish, but I don't remember the word in English. But in terms of those things, they were asking women when they were on labor, and again, it's like asking a woman who's in a lot of pain, like, "Hey, are you planning to having more babies?" Chances were that the answer was no, and they were getting the signature, and then they were performing this procedure, and then after a while, the women were like, "Okay, wait a minute, I do want another baby." So there was some changes in rules. They're not supposed to ask during that time women, but again, we know it's still going on. And indigenous women, that they were sterilized without them knowing it, and then when they were trying to have more babies, they couldn't. And then doing some research, people actually found out that they were sterilized without their consent. So there are a lot of things going on in there, but in general, those are isolated scenarios. But in general, Mexico was really good at reducing fertility, and actually, the United Nations um, awarded Mexico this. I don't remember what's the name of this award. Like, okay, you did a great job. So we can see these trends. But and again, this age-specific fertility rate, sorry, the total fertility rate is serving as the standard in demographic, at least, studies, to see how high or how low is your fertility. And the reason for this is, let me see if I can, well, I have more countries here before going to that. So we can see all these combinations, and I just use the smoothing option in Excel. We have all these countries having different combinations or different timing for fertility. Here, for instance, I am including Colombia in dark blue. This is Colombia, which is similar to the pattern that we have in Mexico. Most Latin Americans actually have this pattern where we have high teenage fertility, then modal age around 20 to 24, and then the decline. And again, this decline is essentially for contraception after the first baby that women have. We have some other countries like, again, let's start with higher teenage fertility. Romania, at the end of the day, they are Latinos as well. They have high teenage fertility, but then they're pushing, again, they have a different access to contraception, and then their modal age is 25 to 29, and then they have this decline. And as you can see, even though the shape is similar to the one in Colombia, the difference in magnitude of the rates change from Colombia having on a total fertility rate of 2.48 on average to Romania having 1.32 children on average, which is a significant change here. And then we have all these countries actually starting with really low fertility early in life. The first one that we have that starts increasing is France, and this is an example that we had before. And it's actually reaching levels, it's actually higher than Colombia, but in a different age group, like pushing that fertility later in life, and then the decline. And France actually has relatively high fertility for a European country. And then, as you can see, Sweden is a similar pattern, but again, all this small fertility or smaller fertility here has a consequence on Sweden having 1.85 instead of 1.98, which is again something that we know is happening, but they are not as low as Romania in this example, or Italy, where they're actually pushing the fertility to really, really late stages in life. Their modal age is 30 to 34, and then we have this decline. So we can see all these different patterns, and these patterns are resulting in different total fertility rates. And of course, the background story is access to contraception, marital options. France and Sweden actually have really, really good welfare systems where they provide conditions for women to have kids, and like daycare, maternity leave, and not a crappy maternity leave like the one we have in Mexico. Because yes, we have maternity leave in Mexico, but it's only 3 months. They have 2 years or at least 1 year. So you go home, and not only women, men can also go home. And I think the first year is for women and men, and the second year they get to choose who's going to stay at home. And what they have seen in Sweden and Norway is that a large proportion of men are actually choosing to stay at home, and women are going back to work. And again, they have all these things: free daycare, free college, and all these things, and healthcare. And again, they're promoting this population to have kids, and they're having relatively high fertility in terms of European standards. Italy, Romania, they also have this welfare, but not as well developed as these other countries. And again, women have different perspectives and different plans on their lives, so their fertility remains relatively low. Okay, so why is this relevant? And this is the key significance of the total fertility rate, is that we can measure differences between regions, what I just did here, like tracking these changes. We can track trends in time. I just did it for Mexico as well, and you're going to do it for your state, see how this fertility is changing. But we use the value of this total fertility rate to indicate if a country is what we call above or below replacement. And this is moving between talking about fertility in general to talking about reproduction. Remember that reproduction is how a population is replacing its members. Like, are we having enough kids to replace those who are leaving my population? So again, replacement level essentially is how many kids a woman should have on average at the end of her reproductive years to guarantee that the population is being replaced. And this value is set to 2.1, sorry. So the two makes sense, right? So if we have in babies, we're talking about fertility. And again, thinking inside the box is we need two individuals to have this baby. So if they have two kids, they are replacing themselves. But we need a 0.1, an additional 0.1 in these things. And that is because we need to take into account mortality. Not all these kids are going to survive long enough to reproduce themselves. So we need an additional 0.1 in this thing to make sure that these countries are going to be getting these things. So this value of 2.1 is really important because countries that have values below 2.1 will eventually have a declining population. And again, declining population is something that is not frowned upon, but again, is not something that you're looking forward to have as a country, because you need people working, you need people taking care of some other people. Values above 2.1 means the population is increasing. Values around 2.1 will end up with a population being stable in the long term. Okay, so again, as I was saying, we have these values, and Romania is really concerned about this rate. Italy is concerned about this rate, but well, we have in Italy migration from northern African countries. France is making good progress in terms of having a fertility rate that is not that low. Sweden as well, and most Latin American countries are trying to get to 2.1, and we're almost there, but it's really hard to get. It's easy to move from 6 to 5 to 4, but then moving from 3 to 2.1 is really complicated. Okay, so now we have some free time. So I also uploaded this file to Blackboard. So this file, I got it from the United Nations. They have information for so many countries for different years. These are age-specific fertility rates. And we can just explore these things, right? So let's see what, again, we had the values for Mexico before. It was the 6.5 that I told you. And now we are, well, the last value that they have is 2005, 2006, but I already had the value for 2015. It was 2.18, I believe. So we are almost there in terms of replacing the population or reaching replacement levels. But let's see what happens with Japan. From the 70s, they were already below replacement, or they were essentially at replacement, 2.1. That's for in general terms. So Japan's fertility is actually really low. Japanese authorities are really worried about people not having babies, and they are facing issues with declining population. So the population is really old, they're not having babies, and the problem with Japan is they are not as welcoming as accepting migrants as one might expect. So again, there's an issue for policy in Japan, and that's the reason they are developing all these technologies to help all people to doing these things. So again, it's not by definition bad to have a really low fertility, but again, Japan has the resources, and they can essentially create robots that are going to help taking care of old people and all these things. So, but as you can see, Japan in the 70s had a lower fertility than Mexico has even nowadays. France, 2.4, they were really advanced in these things, but see how fertility went down and then it went up. So if we want to understand what happened here, I want to get this chart just to see the general shape. So so as you can see here, they had a fertility that is not that different from the one that we have in Mexico. Then it declined, and they declined significantly in this age group, and in this didn't. And then we have a further decline for the grade 1. This is the third one, yes. But then what happened was that we see that this increase, and that increase is actually the increase that happened in these later years in life. So that's another thing. A lot of people, when they saw these rates going down, they say, okay, France, you have an issue. Women are not having babies. But the reason was that it's not that they didn't want to have babies, is that they just decided to have babies later in life. So nobody was expecting this increase here, but then that is what happens, and that is where that because French women are essentially pushing their fertility to later in life, and again they're below replacement, but they are not as low as 1.7, which is a really low value. And we can see, well, Ethiopia has really high values all around these years. They even went as high as 7.5, and again that's on average. So that means that some women were having way more babies than 7, or even more than 10. And of course now they're going down, but still they're at the same level as in that. Well, that the last value is from 1998. But look, that in 2003 they were about the same value as in 1969. So again, they don't have access to contraception. They still had a relatively high infant mortality. So that means that women, in order, if they want to have 2 or 3 kids, they have to give birth to lots of kids in order to reach the desired fertility at the end of their lives. Romania is, well, again, we see the impact of policies that were actually moving women into the labor force, the work force, and that has to do with access to contraception and so many things. China, well, I mean, no. China actually went down really fast from the same levels that Mexico had, well, about the same levels, all the way to 1.3. So let's see what happened here. So here you can see what China has been really good at doing is similar to what happened in Mexico. Is like once you have a baby, that's it. Mhm. And we can see that because the modal age at fertility is really early in life, and then we see this decline. And essentially, that has to do with the policy that China has on the one-child policy, reducing the fertility in like different age groups. And Sweden, well, in the 70s they were already below replacement, but now they were around these things around. Let me see Spain. And most European countries actually have really low values. Colombia have values similar to Mexico, and Brazil actually started similar to Mexico, and then they went down really fast. Again, access to contraception and so many things. So again, this is if you go to just Google United Nations age-specific fertility rates, you're gonna find information for so many countries. For these are the years that they usually have, but if you I don't know, you wonder about Russia, you can go and find the information from Russia. Cuba has really low fertility, and so many things that we can do with these things. Okay, so that's all for this morning. Next week, we are going to include mortality into these estimations. So that's the reason we need to discuss life tables first, and then we're going to get some values from the life tables to modify these things and take into account mortality in this reproduction perspective. Okay, so are there any questions? Are you still there? Okay, if there are no questions, see you next week. Have a nice weekend. Yes, Luis. Oh. I know. I can hear you.
Para la actividad 10 tenemos que hacer lo que dijiste ayer, que no era fuerza, hacer para la...
No, al menos uno de todo lo que vimos ayer. O sea, si hay que